Hello and welcome to the P21 Freight Recovery Training Podcast. My name is Al Hughes, and in today's training, we're going to discuss the freight process as it pertains to CSRs and warehouse staff. The session will probably last around 25 minutes, and it's designed so that you can listen to a little bit of it. You can pause it sometimes, maybe back it up a little bit and play some more. So don't be shy about grabbing a pen and a piece of paper and making some notes if you want. It's important to understand that DXP's shipping and handling expenses include not only the carrier freight charge, but also such things as cardboard shipping boxes, packing peanuts, shipping tape, and various different receiving and shipping equipment. So be aware that when we add a freight line on a sales order, if possible, we mark up the sale price in an attempt to recapture as much of our shipping and handling expenses as possible. Most of our branches end each month with a freight loss. They don't break even, they actually lose money, and that's just on the freight carrier expenses alone. So understand that we are simply trying to make a conscious effort to recover real shipping and handling costs. In a few minutes, we'll go into the UPS Quantum View application and show you how to use it to calculate the DXP freight that we incur. We want you to use the online application in place of printed charts because there are often surcharges added by the carrier that reflect in the online application but not on the printed charts. And some examples of surcharges might be fuel surcharges, large package surcharges, holiday surcharges, and also there are other carriers that are now offering online freight rating applications as well. So we want to use those whenever we can. As CSRs and warehouse staff, you need to be aware of the location that you work for. You need to be aware of their freight recovery strategy. And this is usually driven by the Vice President of Operations in collaboration with the Customer Service Manager. This strategy might include a list of contract customers that we are not allowed to bill freight, or a list of special contract items where special freight rules apply. Also included in the strategy should be the amount of markup on freight lines. This is what we key in the unit price field of P21. So it should be communicated in this strategy the recommended markup levels for different customers, or even different markup increments for higher dollar sales orders. And it should emphasize that costing freight lines to sales orders is key if we can't bill the customer a freight price. So just be sure that if you aren't aware of your freight strategy, to ask your customer service manager, and he'll go over some of those details with you. In today's call, we're also going to add some freight lines on sales orders and pick tickets. We're going to add some costed freight lines on sales orders and pick tickets as well. And at the very end of the call, we're going to confirm some direct shipments, or we're going to do at least one, just because we want to show the freight, the adding of the freight line in that scenario as well. So with that said, I think we're just going to go over and go into the UPS rating application, and it should be popping up on your screen about now. So you can see that if you wanted to, you could log in on the left side over there, but you don't have to. Look up in the top center. I'm moving my mouse around the word shipping, and that's what we need to click on. So you don't even need to log in. Just click on shipping, and you'll get all these options appearing below. But over on the left side, one says calculate time and cost. So I click on that. It's going to start populating now on my screen. And what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the cost on a couple different shipments. So notice first of all, what I do is I put in the ship from zip code. Then down here, I put in the ship to zip code. And then I click update and it takes me to the second page. And in the second page is where I have to put in the dimensions of my package and the weight. And I'm going to do two different ratings here. They're both going to weigh 14 pounds. But notice that I'm putting in a 4x4x12 now. And in the next one, I'm going to rate a much larger package that weighs just 14 pounds. And I'm just doing that so you can see that it makes a big difference in our cost. So all I'm trying to say is that when you rate them on a chart, you're not going to see the difference. But if you rate them online, it's going to show you a difference because of the surcharges. So here's the one 4x4x12. It's 14 pounds. It always pops up with the next day air and second day air things at the top. But down towards the bottom is where it shows the UPS ground. And we can see at the bottom here, it shows 14 pounds. It came to 14.23. And I can click view details. And it shows me even that one has a fuel surcharge. So just about every package we ship has a fuel surcharge. And I'm going to do one more rating, but I'm going to do a really weird shaped package. It's going to be one that's like 6 foot long, and it's going to be one of those extra girth size packages. And it's going to rate much higher than this, even though it's still only just 14 pounds. So we'll go back and start over now. And I'm just going to click on shipping again, and then I'm going to click on calculate time and cost. And now I'm going to go ahead with our zip codes. There we go. And we'll do the to zip code. Then I click update and it goes to my next page. Now for the actual size of this one, we're going to go 12 by 12 by 68 inches long. So that's a much different size package, but it still only weighs 14 pounds. And again, we'll just go down here and we'll do everything else the same way. And now I just click update. And now, again, it shows all the next day air and second day airs at the top, and I go down towards the bottom, and it shows a much different price down here in the bottom. And notice if I go to view details, the standard UPS charge there is $35.06, but there's a handling charge, so a handling surcharge of $14.25. There's a fuel surcharge of $3.45, and so that comes to $52.76 per package. So again, especially on weird items, it makes a big difference if you rate them online. And let me just point out too, you notice it's showing 71 pounds here. Well, I called the 800 number at UPS because I said, hey, something's wrong with your app. I'm only rating it at 14 pounds and it's come up at 71. And their explanation was that when it's got this weird girth size, it goes up to a different category of rating. And even though we're only rating it at 14 pounds, it's showing 71 there because this is the equivalent cost of a 71-pound package with that girth size. So, be sure you put in the right weight and everything, and it will still, even though it says 71 there, it'll still calculate it correctly. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go on into P21 and we're going to rate some packages, or excuse me, we're going to add some freight lines. So for right now, I've pulled up a sales order in the order entry screen, and right here on the header it says freight code yes. Well, I'm just going to space through that for a second and just put down here. I just want you to see all the different freight codes, and everybody should already know this anyway. But no means you cannot bill freight in or freight out to the customer. No yes means you cannot bill freight in, but you can bill freight out. Yes means you can bill both to the customer, and of course, yes, no means you can bill freight in but not freight out. And the top two charges are direct ship charges, and normally those will be flagged by the CSRs that process and that invoice the direct shipment. So you normally won't have to worry about the direct charge ones. But you need to be fully aware of what all these four mean. And if you suspect that they might have flagged it wrong, because it's up to the CSR when they key this order to put in the right freight code. But because you should also have an understanding of your location's freight strategy, you might be aware of some customers that you can't bill freight. So if somebody keyed something that looks wrong, double check with the CSR and see if they might have overlooked something and their freight code could be wrong. But generally speaking, you should be able to follow these freight codes. The next thing we want to point out is look up in the upper right, there's a shipments tab up here. And when there's a pick ticket or an invoice, that shipments tab is bold. Well, we're going to add a freight line to this order, and it's okay to do it because so far there's no pick tickets and no invoices against this sales order. All we want you to be aware of is that if the pick tickets have already been generated and everything's been processed on this, adding a freight line is going to do no good for nobody, because it's the act of printing a pick ticket that pulls the freight charge onto the pick ticket. And if there's no more pick tickets to generate, then your FRT line is just going to hang out here for a long time without ever getting billed. So again, you should already be aware of this, but always add the freight lines in the sales order before you go and generate the pick tickets. So your standard process would be that you check in all your UPS product, you receive the items against it, and it allocates to the sales orders. Then you add your freight lines to those sales orders, and then you generate the pick tickets and it pulls those freight lines onto the pick tickets. Now, also, we could add a freight line even before the item has been received in. And I'm going to do that here just because I have this example of one. So I'm just going to go FRTI. And that's what you would do because it's got yes up there. So we're going to do both in and out. And we're just going to say that the incoming cost is $12. So we put that on the actual quantity ordered. And then in the actual price field, we put in 1.4. At least for this one, that's what we're going to do because that's our location branch strategy right now. And when we put in 1.4, that charges the customer this amount for the freight charge. And in this case, there's also going to be a freight out charge. So I'm just going to go into that field. And we'll say that freight out costed this amount because it wasn't going as far. And then we'll go ahead and say 1.4 there. And that charges it this amount. So now we would be able to, I could save this order and then I would go generate the pick tickets. Or in this case, I would do a receipt and then generate the pick tickets. But again, we want to mention that if you notice the pick ticket has already been printed, but it has not been invoiced yet, then you can go into the shipping screen and add these freight charges to the actual pick ticket. And we'll do that in just a minute. But let's throw a wrench in this for a second before we leave this screen. Let's say that this says no up here, freight code no. So we cannot bill the customer freight. We still add freight lines to this because we incurred freight charges. The only difference would be that in the price field, we would have 0 because we're not going to bill these to the customer. So in this case, if I was only costing my freight to this, it would look like this. Because we still incurred these freight charges, but we're not going to bill the customer these freight charges. So this is what it would look like if I was just costing these to the order. And of course, I would have the 1.4 and so forth in there if I was billing it to the order. So I'm going to sweep this one clean because it was just hypothetical and I really don't want to add those freight charges. And we're going to go right on in to the actual shipping screen and look at one of them. So in the shipping screen, let's see here. I'm going to pull it up here. And we're going to pull up this ticket right here. And as it populates, the first thing we want to know is, what's the freight code? So sometimes you can tell that just by looking at the pick ticket, because the pick ticket might say UPS collect and it might have a UPS account number on it or whatever. But you can also click right into this out freight tab, and here's the freight code. So here it says yes, which tells me I can add both freight in and freight out for this item. And so just like in the sales order, we add it the same way, FRTI. We go in here, we put in, and I'll just put 1126. And now in this area, I'm going to go ahead and put 1.4. And it marked it up. Now you don't see an extended price in here, but keep in mind you do see it if you click on the pricing tab up here. So up in this pricing tab, it shows the extended price. And you can see it right there. So it shows the unit price was 1.4. The extended price was this amount. So we can still see it if we want to. And again, I'm using 1.4. But whatever your local branch strategy is, you might be marking them up 1.25. You might be marking them up 1.7. And it probably will depend on who the customer is. So I'm going to say on the outgoing one, we had an $8 cost. And so I mark it up here at 1.3, and we're just doing that just to show that it'll accept whatever you put in there. And again, if this one said no up here, where we're just costing it, then I would just change that to 0, and I would just change that to 0, and that way we're costing that freight against these orders, and we're not actually billing that freight to the customer. So with that said, let's go over to the direct ship screen for a second. And I just want to point out, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up this sales order, which is a direct shipment. It's got a D here. So normally the warehouse staff won't be involved in this step. This is just going to take a few minutes. But sometimes maybe you, depending on what branch you're at, maybe some of you are billing customers for direct shipments. But the bottom line is that oftentimes, or at least the main difference here, is that the product is not coming in the warehouse like a normal item would. It's being shipped from the vendor to the customer, so nothing's being checked in your warehouse. Rather than that, normally the CSR receives an email or some kind of alert, or they get an invoice from Coupa, or they get a vendor acknowledgement email to them, or somehow that CSR is alerted that this product is shipped. And in that alert they get, there's a tracker number, there's an invoice number, there might be a freight charge on the invoice, or they find out the size and weight of the package, and they go into the actual UPS application and they figure out what the freight charge is. But however they find out that information, they still go in when they're done finding out the freight charge, and they add an FRT line. Instead of an instead of an FRTI, it's an FRTO line, because there's one shipment on a direct shipment, and it's the shipment out. So they put in whatever the actual freight charge is, and they do it the same way you do it when you're actually processing a standard shipment. And after they've added this line and they hit save, then they go over to the direct shipment screen. And I'm just going to show you something. And by the way, I know some of you right now, especially if you're from a machine tooling location, you're saying, that's not the way we do it. Well, just hang tight a minute and I'll deal with that. But after you've added the line to the sales order, you come into this screen and you put in the tracker number here, then you put in the vendor invoice number here, and the quantity you received here, and then you just hit save, and that confirms the shipment, it bills the customer, and it adds that freight line to the customer's invoice the way you added it to the sales order. So that's the standard way that a direct shipment is done. We do have probably close around a half a dozen different machine tooling locations across the country who handle thousands of direct ship line items a month. And they have a slightly different process than what I just showed here. But I'm not even going to go into the process they use, because they have a process that they're all aware of. And it's just almost very similar to what we just did, but there's just a few slight differences. So if you're watching this and you're from a machine tool location, that's why you didn't see your standard process there, because we're just dealing with the standard process that's used in most locations across the country. So I'm going to sweep this one clean because I don't really want to receive anything here. So just to reiterate what we did, we talked for a minute about the freight awareness and about using the UPS Quantum View app to calculate your freight expense. We talked for a minute about your location's strategy of freight recovery. We went in and we added some lines to a sales order, and we added some lines to a pick ticket, some freight lines, and we marked them up. And then we also showed you how to add them, just costing them with the zero price. And then the last couple minutes, we just did the direct ship process for the CSRs that process those. But what's really important is that you make sure that you're aware of what your local strategy is, and your customer service manager might discuss with you even a little bit. They might get into a little more detail on that UPS rating screen that we did in the beginning, and then they'll talk more about how to mark up or what amount to mark up different customers. But what we dealt with was the process, and your strategy should fill in some of the details, the specifics of that process. So that brings us to the end of this freight podcast. We look forward to seeing you again on future training sessions. So everybody have a great day. Thanks.